welcome to my channel or back to my channel if you're not here for the first time. In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to sew this box crop top. In my previous video, I showed you how to make the pattern for this top, so be sure to check that video out first before watching this video. So I saw this picture on Pinterest, and as usual, I wanted to create it, and I went ahead and did so with the top I'm wearing right now. I really love this top, and I know I must have worn a crop top in one or two of my videos so far right now. However, I don't have what we call here in Nigeria the liver to wear crop tops out. I feel very self-conscious. However, with this top, I literally looked for a reason to go out the day I finished making it so that I could wear it out. I was that excited. And it is so comfortable and so breezy, and I think it's because of the boxy effect that I wasn't self-conscious at all. So just so you know right now, I'm going to be making another like 4 to 5 pieces in different fabrics. So in my next videos, if you see like 5 subsequent videos of me wearing this top, it just goes to show you how much I love it. Full disclosure right now. So go ahead and grab all your grabbables so that you can make this super easy breezy top with me. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave me a comment in the comment section below. Okay then, let's get started already. My name is Ejoma, and welcome to my sewing diary. The materials you will need are your completed box crop top pattern. I made this in my previous video and will include the link in the description box below. You'll also need your main fabric. I used less than a yard, some interface to stabilize the facing and button allowance, so basically less than a quarter of a yard for this, fabric scissors, pins, needle and thread in contrasting color for basting, thread in same color as main fabric for sewing, measuring tape, buttons, razor blade, and Tailors chalk. I'll leave the full list in the description box below. So cut your fabric according to the directions on your pattern pieces, and also cut 2 7/8 inch wide interface pieces, the length of your center front. You'll be cutting your facing pieces on the main fabric and interface fabric. So when you're done cutting, you should have your back facing cut-on fold on the main fabric and interface, 2 front facing pieces on the main fabric and interface, 2 sleeve pieces on main fabric only, 2 center front pieces on main fabric only, and 1 back piece cut-on fold on main fabric only. Mark notches at all seam intersections like so. On your sleeve pattern, make sure you mark 2 notches for the back and 1 for the front, in addition to all the other notches you will be making. This is so that you can differentiate between the front and the back. So we'll start by preparing the fabrics. Now on the wrong side of your center front pieces, mark out your button allowances and seam allowance with your Tailors chalk and ruler like you did your pattern pieces. So you'll be marking your seam allowance 1/2 inch in from the edge of the center front and then your first button allowance 1 inch in from the seam allowance, and your second button allowance 1 inch in from the first mark. Again, please note that your button allowance width is dependent on the size of the button you are using. So I went further to baste these lines. Now you do not have to do this, but I wanted to be as precise as possible. So go ahead and pin your 7/8 inch wide interface strips at the button allowance closer to the bulk of the center front. Also pin your interface on the facing pieces and then press all interface to the main fabric with your iron. When you're done, on your center front piece, fold and pin your seam allowance line. You'll be pressing down with your iron and then folding again over the next button allowance line, pinning and pressing. Now you want to create crisp fold lines, so go ahead and do this on both center front pieces. If you've basted like me, carefully take off all basting stitches when you're done. Placing right side on right side, pin your center front pieces and center back piece at the side and shoulder. You'll be stitching with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Also, with right side on right side, pin the sides of your front facing to your back facing and stitch with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. When you're done, press open all seam allowances on bodice and facing pieces, and then trim the seam allowance on the facing piece to reduce bulk. Now ignore all the loose thread here. I'll be interlocking at the end of this video as I find it easier for me because this way I don't shave off my seam allowance. On the wrong side of the bottom of your bodice, mark your hem allowance. Since I used 2 inches for mine, I will first mark 1/2 inch and then a further 1.5 inches. Now if you've used 2.5 inches, you will first mark 1/2 inch and then a further 2 inches. So do this to the entire length of the bottom of your bodice. In my case, I've left the button allowance folded, but you can choose to open this up and then mark. Go ahead and fold and pin your hem accordingly. So first folding, pinning and pressing the 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then further folding, pinning and pressing the 1.5 inch seam allowance. Stitch at less than 1/8 of an inch close to the inner edge. Placing right side of facing on right side of the bodice, go ahead and pin the necklines together, matching notches and seam allowances. At the center front, you will need to open the folded button and seam allowance and pin the facing to the bodice. You will notice that the front neckline of the facing might seem smaller than that of the bodice. So make small 1/8 inch snips on the front facing neckline only. This will allow it to expand to the entire length of the bodice neckline. Go ahead and pin the necklines together and you'll be sewing with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. When you're done, trim off all excess to 1/4 of an inch and then press the trimmed seam allowance towards the facing, stitching on the facing with a 1/8 inch seam allowance, and then go ahead and press the right side of the fabric afterwards. Fold back your button allowance at the center front to now include the facing, and then pin throughout the length of your button allowance like so. So you'll be stitching at less than 1/8 of an inch seam allowance on the wrong side. I also went ahead and tacked the top edge of the button allowance so that it does not move. When you're done, press down your sewn button allowance. Now it's time to attach the sleeve. So starting with one sleeve, go ahead and mark your hem allowance at the edge and like you did the bodice. Fold, pin and press the same way too. You'll be stitching at less than 1/8 of an inch and close to the inner edge on the wrong side. When you're done, fold each sleeve right side on right side and pin the side seams together. Go ahead and stitch with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Press open your seam allowances when you're done. To insert the sleeve in the bodice, first you need to run a loose stitch at the sleeve head about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. I like to run mine from where I made the notches on one side to the other. The reason is to gather the sleeve head and distribute the excess created during the pattern making. With right sides of the sleeve on right side of the bodice and ensuring that the notches of the sleeve match the front and back bodies, recall we made 2 for the back and 1 for the front. Locate your crown notch on the sleeve and then pin this to the shoulder seam. Also pin the sleeve side seam to the bodice side seam. Then go ahead and pin from the side seams to the start of the basting stitch done on both sides. At the sleeve head, you will notice that the sleeve is larger than the bodice armhole. As mentioned before, this is due to the excess in the sleeve pattern. So go ahead and pull your thread on each side to gather the sleeve head. Now you want to make sure that your gathering is evenly distributed around the head and the sleeve head can fit snugly into the bodice armhole. So the aim here is to get a well-rounded sleeve. So this is a very patient bit. You don't want any gathering to show on the right side of the garment. So you want to make sure that you are distributing the gathering very well. When they fit well enough, go ahead and pin together. Baste the sleeve and the bodice together at 1/4 inch away from the edge. This will make sure that your pinned sleeve does not move because you would definitely want it to stay in place. Then go ahead and stitch with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, smoothing all gathers as you sew. Now, because your gathering stitch was done at 1/8 inch from the sleeve edge, the gathering will pretty much remain at that section when you're sewing. But you want to make sure no gathering shows on the right side of your fabric, so make sure you fill it through as you were sewing. When you're done, remove the basting stitches and you should have a well-rounded sleeve like this. So it's time to place your buttons and make your buttonhole. I had tested this on my body to determine where I wanted to place the buttons, so you can do this as well. Now with your center front pinned together, I marked my first button placement 1/4 inch down from the button allowance top edge. Subsequent 2 were 3 inches apart, and the last button was placed at the hem allowance like so. The marks made should be the same length as the size of button you'll be using and in your desired direction. Transferring the same marks to the other side of the center front, go ahead and sew on your buttons on one side of the center front. I sewed my buttons on the left hand side of my center front, leaving my buttonholes to be placed on the right hand side. To sew your buttonholes with your domestic sewing machine, start with your settings on point 4.2 and sew a couple of times. Now I'm using a Toshiba sewing machine, so the number of settings is dependent on the type of machine you are using, but it should be the same stitch essentially. Then go ahead and change your settings to point 3 and stitch until you get to the end of your mark made. Then change back to point 4.2 and sew a couple of times. And finally change to point 1 and sew up until you get to the first start. Do this for all buttonhole marks made. With your razor blade, go ahead and open your buttonholes like so. You will now need to interlock the raw edges so that you have a very clean finish. I found out that interlocking before sewing takes off some of my seam allowance, so I usually leave this till the end where necessary. So you'll be interlocking the bottom part of your facing as well as your armhole and then side seams of your bodice and sleeves. Since I don't have an interlocking machine, I have been left at the mercy of my local tailor who only had a white thread on his interlocking machine. But I'm not really mad at it because I kind of like the contrast between the garment and the white thread. And you're done! I can't wait to see you next week Friday, 10 a.m. West African time to see the next garment I'll be making. So until then, see you later. Bye!